I don't know what to do. Look at him, he has no idea.
This isn't funny, Frank. Oh, it's hilarious.
He's right, you know.
Daniel Reeves wiped the grease from his hands and did not know that in exactly 6 hours, a black Cadillac Escalade would roll into his driveway and turn his entire life upside down. He was 34 years old, a single father raising his 8-year-old daughter alone, and he had spent 11 years fixing cars at a small garage called Sullivan Auto Repair. He believed loyalty meant something. He believed hard work meant something. He was wrong. That morning, his boss called him into the office, looked him straight in the eye, and told him he was finished. No warning, no severance, no explanation that made any sense. Daniel walked out with a cardboard box of tools and a heart full of questions, never imagining that the woman about to step out of that black SUV already knew the truth about why he was really fired, and she was not going to let it slide. If you are watching this video right now, comment down below and tell everyone where you are watching from today. I love seeing how many different places this story reaches. So do not be shy, drop your city or your country in the comments, and let us get this conversation going before we dive into everything that happened to Daniel and his daughter Lily. The town of Maple Ridge, Ohio, was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where the diner on Main Street still served coffee for $1, and where the biggest news of the month was usually about the high school football team. Daniel Reeves had grown up there, and after his wife passed away when Lily was only 2 years old, he had stayed in Maple Ridge because it was the only home his daughter had ever known. He worked 6 days a week at Sullivan Auto Repair, arriving before sunrise and leaving after the sky turned orange, all so he could give Lily a stable life, a warm house, and a father who never missed a school recital, even if it meant closing the garage early. Frank Sullivan, the owner of the garage, had inherited the business from his own father, and for years he had treated Daniel like family. Or at least, that was what Daniel believed. Frank often patted him on the back and called him the best mechanic in 3 counties. Customers requested Daniel by name. They trusted him with their cars because he never overcharged them and never cut corners. He remembered birthdays. He remembered which elderly customers needed a little extra patience, explaining what was wrong with their vehicles. He was, in every sense, the heart of that garage. But something had changed over the past few months. Frank had grown distant, cold, and short-tempered. He started disappearing for long stretches during the day, taking phone calls outside where nobody could hear him, and locking his office door more often than he ever had before. Daniel noticed the shift but told himself it was none of his business. He had learned a long time ago that keeping his head down and doing his job was the safest way to protect the life he had built for Lily. Then came that Tuesday morning in early October, when the leaves outside the garage windows had just begun to turn gold and red. Daniel had arrived at 6 in the morning as always, brewed a pot of coffee for the shop, and started his first job of the day, replacing the brake pads on an old Honda Civic. Around 9 o'clock, Frank walked out of his office and asked Daniel to come speak with him. Daniel figured it was about scheduling, maybe a new client, maybe an apology for how strange Frank had been acting lately. Instead, Frank slid a single piece of paper across the desk and told Daniel that his employment at Sullivan Auto Repair was terminated, effective immediately. Daniel stared at the paper, then at Frank, waiting for some kind of explanation. Frank simply said that business had been slow and that cuts had to be made. Daniel pointed out that he had brought in more repeat customers than anyone else on the team, that he had never once complained about working overtime, that he had personally trained 2 of the newer mechanics who were still employed there. Frank would not look him in the eye. He mumbled something about budget numbers and told Daniel to clean out his locker by noon. Daniel walked back into the garage in a daze. His co-workers, many had worked beside for years, avoided eye contact with him, which told him they already knew this was coming and had said nothing. He packed his tools into a cardboard box, the same tools his own father had given him when he was 19 years old and just starting out in this trade. He thought about Lily, about the rent that was due in 2 weeks, about the promise he had made to buy her a new pair of winter boots before the cold weather hit. He walked out of Sullivan Auto Repair for what he believed was the very last time, carrying 11 years of loyalty in a box that weighed almost nothing and felt heavier than anything he had ever lifted. That afternoon, Daniel picked Lily up from school like he always did. She climbed into his old pickup truck, her backpack covered in stickers of cartoon foxes, and immediately started telling him about her day, about a spelling test she had aced, and a classmate who had brought a lizard for show and tell. Daniel smiled and nodded along, but his mind was somewhere else entirely, calculating bills, wondering how he would explain to his daughter that things might get harder for a while. He decided right then that he would not let her see him worried. She deserved a childhood free of that kind of weight, even if he had to carry it alone. He dropped her off at his neighbor Mrs. Patterson's house, an older widow who often watched Lily for an hour after school while Daniel finished his shifts, and then he drove back towards Sullivan Auto Repair. He was not entirely sure why. Maybe he wanted answers. Maybe he simply could not accept that 11 years could end with a single sentence in a cardboard box. As he approached the garage, he noticed something strange. A black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows was parked directly in front of the main office, and Frank Sullivan was standing outside it, looking pale and nervous, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool October afternoon. Daniel parked his truck across the street and watched. The driver's side door of the Escalade opened, and a woman stepped out. She was tall, sharply dressed in a dark blazer with an air of quiet authority that made even the busy street seem to slow down around her. Her name, though Daniel did not know it yet, was Victoria Hale, and she was the Regional Director of Operations for Continental Auto Group, one of the largest automotive service corporations in the entire Midwest. Continental Auto Group had been secretly reviewing Sullivan Auto Repair for the past several months because of a series of anonymous complaints filed with the State Consumer Protection Office. Complaints about inflated invoices, unnecessary repairs charged to unsuspecting customers, and falsified service records. What Frank Sullivan had not told anyone, not even his own employees, was that he had been skimming money from customer accounts for over a year, quietly cutting corners on parts while charging full price for premium service, all to cover a gambling debt that had spiraled far beyond his control. He had fired Daniel not because of budget cuts, but because Daniel had recently found discrepancies in the invoice records and had innocently mentioned it to Frank, unaware that his honesty had made him a liability in his boss's eyes. Frank could not risk having his most trusted mechanic looking too closely at the books, so he eliminated the risk the only way he knew how, by firing the one employee who might expose him. Victoria Hale, however, had already done her homework. Continental Auto Group had been investigating Sullivan Auto Repair for weeks, and during that investigation, her team had interviewed former customers, cross-referenced repair records, and even spoken quietly with two mechanics who still worked there. One name kept coming up over and over again as the most honest, most skilled, and most respected mechanic in the entire operation, a name that belonged to the very man who had just been fired that morning. Daniel Reeves. Victoria walked into the office with Frank trailing nervously behind her, and for the next 20 minutes, she laid out everything her team had uncovered. The falsified records, the inflated charges, the pattern of fraud that stretched back over a year. Frank tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to blame market conditions and supply costs, but Victoria had brought copies of the actual documentation, and there was no explaining away numbers that did not lie. She informed him that Continental Auto Group would be terminating its supplier partnership with Sullivan Auto Repair immediately, and that the State Consumer Protection Office would be receiving a full report of the findings within the week. As Victoria walked back out to her Escalade, she noticed a man sitting in an old pickup truck across the street, watching the scene unfold with a look of quiet confusion on his face. Something about him seemed familiar, and then it clicked. She recognized him from the employee photographs her team had gathered during the investigation. This was Daniel Reeves, the mechanic everyone described as the most honest man in the building, the same man who, according to her research, had been abruptly fired that very morning. Victoria crossed the street and approached the truck. Daniel rolled down his window, unsure what to expect from a woman who clearly commanded serious authority. She introduced herself, explained briefly who she was, and asked him directly why he no longer worked at Sullivan Auto Repair. Daniel, still stunned by the events of the day, explained everything. The sudden termination, the vague excuse about budget cuts, the 11 years of loyal service that seemed to mean nothing in the end. Victoria listened carefully, and as he spoke, pieces of the investigation began falling into place in her mind. She asked him one more question. She asked if he had ever noticed anything unusual with the invoices or the parts inventory. Daniel hesitated, then admitted that yes, about 2 weeks earlier, he had noticed that several customers were being charged for premium brake components while cheaper, lower quality parts were actually being installed on their vehicles. He had mentioned it to Frank in passing, thinking it might have been an honest mistake, an error in the ordering system. He never imagined it would cost him his job. Victoria nodded slowly, and for the first time since arriving in Maple Ridge that day, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She told Daniel that his honesty had, without him even realizing it, helped expose a fraud scheme that had been hurting local families for well over a year. She explained that Continental Auto Group was going to need a new certified service partner in the Maple Ridge area now that their relationship with Sullivan Auto Repair had been terminated, and she asked Daniel a question that would change the course of his entire life. She asked him if he had ever considered owning his own garage. Daniel laughed, a tired, disbelieving laugh, and told her that a mechanic's salary barely covered rent and groceries for him and his daughter, let alone the capital needed to open a business. Victoria explained that Continental Auto Group had a small business partnership program, one that provided startup funding, equipment leasing, and a guaranteed customer base for mechanics with proven integrity and skill, exactly the kind of mechanic the company had just spent weeks confirming Daniel to be. She told him she would need to run it through corporate approval, but based on everything her investigation had shown, she did not expect any pushback. Over the next several weeks, everything in Daniel's life began to shift in ways he never could have predicted. Victoria's team helped him secure a small commercial space just 2 blocks from where Sullivan Auto Repair used to operate, a space that had once been an old tire shop and sat empty for nearly 3 years. Continental Auto Group provided the initial equipment financing, and Victoria personally walked him through the paperwork, patient and thorough, never once making him feel like a charity case. She saw him as exactly what he was, a skilled professional who deserved a fair opportunity. Daniel named his new garage Reeves Family Auto Care, a name that felt right the moment he said it out loud to Lily. His daughter, only 8 years old, drew a small picture of a wrench and a heart to hang above the front door, and Daniel had it framed and mounted right beside the entrance where every customer would see it. Word spread quickly through Maple Ridge about what had happened at Sullivan Auto Repair, about the fraud investigation, about Frank Sullivan's business ultimately closing its doors for good. And word spread just as quickly about the new garage opening under Daniel Reeves, the same honest mechanic half the town already trusted with their vehicles. 2 of Daniel's former co-workers, the same men who had avoided his eyes on the day he was fired, came to him privately and apologized for staying silent when they knew something was wrong with how Frank had been running the business. Daniel, never a man to hold grudges, offered them both jobs at Reeves Family Auto Care, understanding that fear of losing a paycheck could make good people freeze up in difficult moments. Both men accepted, grateful for a second chance to work somewhere they could be proud of again. Victoria continued checking in on Daniel over the following months, initially through professional visits related to the Continental Auto Group partnership, but gradually those visits became something more personal. She admired how he handled the sudden change in his life, not with bitterness, but with quiet determination and gratitude. She watched him interact with customers, remembering their names, their vehicles, their families, treating every single person who walked through his door with the same respect whether they drove a brand new truck or a car held together with duct tape and hope. She watched him with Lily on the afternoons a little girl visited the shop after school, sitting on an overturned bucket doing her homework while her father worked, occasionally handing him tools like a tiny assistant mechanic. The opening day of Reeves Family Auto Care almost did not happen on schedule. 2 days before the ribbon cutting, a delivery truck carrying essential diagnostic equipment broke down on the highway nearly 60 miles away, and the supplier told Daniel it could take another full week to reschedule delivery. Daniel felt his stomach drop, certain that his very first week in business would open without the tools he needed to actually perform half the services he had already promised local customers. He called Victoria that evening, more out of habit than expectation, simply to update her on the setback. Within an hour, she had arranged for a company technician from a neighboring Continental Auto Group location to personally drive the equipment over himself, refusing to let a shipping delay derail a partnership she had fought hard to approve. Daniel stood in his new garage at 9:00 that night, watching the equipment being unloaded, and he understood for the first time that this was not simply charity or a business transaction. Someone was genuinely invested in seeing him succeed. The morning of the grand opening, a small crowd gathered outside the shop, far more people than Daniel had expected for a Tuesday morning in a town the size of Maple Ridge. Old customers from Sullivan Auto Repair stood alongside neighbors, teachers from Lily's school, and even the owner of the diner on Main Street, who had brought over a box of donuts and a thermos of coffee as a welcome gift. Mrs. Patterson stood near the front holding Lily's hand, both of them wearing matching yellow ribbons pinned to their jackets, a color Lily had chosen herself because she said it reminded her of sunshine. When Daniel cut the ribbons stretched across the entrance, the small crowd erupted into applause, and for a moment he had to turn away and wipe his eyes before anyone noticed. The first few months were not without their challenges. Running a business was nothing like being an employee, and Daniel quickly discovered that fixing engines was only half the job. He spent late nights teaching himself how to manage payroll, how to order parts efficiently without overspending, and how to balance the books so that every dollar coming in accounted for every dollar going out. Victoria connected him with a small business mentor from Continental Auto Group's corporate office, a retired shop owner named Harold Whitfield, who had built and sold 3 successful repair chains over his career. Harold visited Maple Ridge twice a month, sitting with Daniel over coffee and walking him through invoicing systems, customer retention strategies, and the kind of practical wisdom that only comes from decades of experience in the trade. One afternoon in late November, a woman named Carol Jennings drove into the shop with her old sedan, making a strange grinding noise every time she braked. She explained almost apologetically that she was a retired school teacher living on a fixed income and could not afford an expensive repair. Daniel inspected the car and discovered the brake pads were worn down almost to nothing, likely from the same low-quality parts Sullivan Auto Repair had been secretly installing for over a year. Rather than charging her full price, Daniel quietly absorbed part of the labor cost himself, telling her only that he wanted to make things right for what she had unknowingly paid for before. Carol Jennings told everyone in her book club about the kindness she received that day, and within a month, 3 new customers walked through the door mentioning her name specifically. Stories like that one repeated themselves throughout the winter. Small acts of honesty and fairness that most business owners might have overlooked in the name of maximizing profit. Daniel never saw it that way. He remembered exactly what it felt like to be treated as replaceable, as a number on a budget sheet rather than a person who mattered. And he refused to run his shop the same way Frank Sullivan had. Every invoice at Reeves Family Auto Care included a clear breakdown of parts and labor, no hidden fees, no inflated numbers, no confusing jargon meant to intimidate customers into paying for services they did not need. By December, the shop had grown busy enough that Daniel needed to hire a third mechanic. He posted the opening quietly, expecting only a handful of applicants in a town as small as Maple Ridge, but word of the shop's reputation had already begun spreading to nearby counties. Among the applicants was a young woman named Amanda Torres, fresh out of a technical college program, who had been turned away from 3 other shops simply because they doubted a woman could handle heavy diesel repair work. Daniel remembered what it felt like to be judged unfairly, and after watching her diagnose a faulty transmission in under 15 minutes during her working interview, he offered her the position on the spot. Amanda quickly became one of the most requested mechanics at the shop, known for her precision and her patience explaining repairs to nervous first-time customers. Christmas that year looked different than any the Reeves family had experienced before. For the first time since Lily was born, Daniel did not have to calculate every dollar spent on gifts, did not have to choose between new boots and a warmer coat, did not have to explain to his daughter why Santa's budget seemed a little tighter than her classmates described at school. He bought her a bicycle, bright red with silver streamers on the handlebars, and watched her ride it in careful circles around the driveway on Christmas morning while the winter sun rose slowly over Maple Ridge. Victoria stopped by that afternoon with a small gift for Lily, a children's book about the history of automobiles, and stayed for dinner at Daniel's invitation. The 4 of them, Daniel, Lily, Mrs. Patterson, and Victoria, sharing a meal around a table that had felt too quiet and too empty for far too many years. By the following spring, Reeves Family Auto Care had become one of the most trusted repair shops in the entire county, with a waiting list for appointments and a reputation built entirely on honesty, something Frank Sullivan had thrown away for the sake of covering his own mistakes. Daniel had not only rebuilt his career, he had built something better than what he lost, a business with his own name on it, a team he trusted completely, and a future he could finally plan without fear. As for Frank Sullivan, the state investigation confirmed everything Continental Auto Group had uncovered. He faced serious fraud charges, lost his business license, and the community that once respected him turned away from him entirely. Word in Maple Ridge was that he eventually moved out of state, unable to face the neighbors and former customers he had deceived for so long. On a quiet Sunday evening, nearly a year after that black Escalade first pulled into the garage parking lot, Victoria Hale sat at Daniel's kitchen table while Lily proudly showed her a science project about how car engines worked, insisting that her father was the smartest mechanic in the entire world. Daniel watched the two of them together, his daughter and the woman whose unexpected arrival had turned the worst day of his life into the beginning of something he never could have imagined. He thought about that cardboard box of tools, about how heavy it had felt walking out of Sullivan Auto Repair for what he believed was the last time. He realized now that sometimes the ending of one chapter, however unfair and painful it feels in the moment, is simply the universe clearing space for something far better to begin. Daniel Reeves never forgot where he came from, and he never let his daughter forget it either. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Continental Auto Group opened its doors to him, he closed the shop early, took Lily out for milkshakes at the old diner on Main Street, and reminded her that honesty, even when it costs you something in the short term, always finds its way back to reward you in the end. And every single time a black Escalade happened to drive past his shop window, Lily would grin and whisper to her father that maybe, just maybe, another family's luck was about to change too. If this story moved you even a little, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that honesty and hard work always find their reward eventually. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and we will see you in the next story.